for us in this living out God's love. We look at the family of God. I invite you to pray with me. Awesome God, we ask that you would open our hearts and our minds to your word this morning, that we might hear even familiar stories in a new way. Bless the reading of this word to us this day. Amen. Our Old Testament reading, or the stories, come from Genesis 18, 1 through 12, and then Genesis 21 for the second part of the story, 1 through 7. This morning, instead of reading straight from the Bible, I'm going to share with you an interpretation of those stories, but encourage you to look at those stories in the Bible and even follow along in this interpretation written by Lutheran pastor Nancy Switzler to put these two stories in perspective for us. What's in a laugh? Waiting for something, it was promised, but it never came. Each month of each year, the disappointment mounted. Surely it will happen next month. Didn't God promise? Eventually something did happen, such excitement that first missed month, and then the second, and then the third, and the fourth. But then something was wrong. No queasiness, no growing belly, nothing. Just a vast emptiness, barren, devoid of hope. Didn't God promise? Can you relate to the unrealized promise that Sarah and Abraham experienced? They were to have children. They were to have lots and lots of children. Look up at the stars in the sky and you will see the representation of the descendants they were promised. How do you feel in the face of an unmet dream? A great disappointment, sadness, loneliness, embarrassment, shame? Sarah wondered if maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they misunderstood what God had told them. Maybe the child was to come through another. She asked Abraham, using different words, "Can't it be that we can force the first surrogate? Didn't God promise?" But when Hagar conceived, Sarah knew it was wrong. This child, the precious child conceived. Well, can we say it? This child conceived this way could never be hers. This was Hagar's child. And now that vast emptiness is filled, not with joyful fulfillment, but with guilt and shame. Shame layered upon shame. It became worse each day as Sarah vented her own frustration upon Hagar. Why did we do this? Didn't God promise? This part of Sarah's story, Sarah and Abraham's story, is often glossed over. Sometimes, though, we think about the animosity within the great Abrahamic faiths, Jewish, Christian, Muslim. Sometimes the story of Hagar is told as an explanation of why things are as they are. In reality, the relationship between us all are often complicated and are made worse by those who choose to see others, not as fellow children of God, but as opponents. There is another great lesson in this, though, and that is that it matters how we accomplish our goal. It matters how we treat one another. How often do we fail to see the image of God in those around us because we are too focused on whatever goal that we have before us? Did Sarah and Abraham have God's promise? Years passed. Yes, devoid of children, no child, no promise. Who is this God? Not one who keeps a promise? Eventually the longing, the hurt, the shame, the feelings of loss faded to a dull ache, an ever-present ache. Receded as background like a ringing in your ears. It is always present and life goes on. Just not the life imagined, expected, promised. One day, visitors came. Who are they? Are they important? Abraham greets them with a bow and a feast. Sarah listens as these strangers sit outside the tent to eat and talk with Abraham. She is within the tent, the place for women, but she could hear. She heard her name, and then she heard the most astounding thing. That promise that she would bear a child, now in her old age, now when it was biologically impossible. Now, she laughed to herself. How could she not? She believed this promise for so long. She misunderstood this promise, and in her confusion had hurt others. So much emotion was in that laugh. As tears trickled down her cheeks, she asked, "Now? Really?" The visitor heard her laugh. The visitor was God, the one who had promised so long ago. The visitor knew her hurt, her humiliation, her guilt, her shame. The visitor asked, "Why did Sarah laugh?" And Sarah denied it, denied all her feelings, because she was suddenly afraid. She so much wanted to say, "I've given up on the promise. It's been too long. I'm too old. That's why I laughed." But instead, in her fear, she replied, "I did not laugh." Amazingly, God did not strike her down, saying, "Oh yes, you did laugh." And just like that, Sarah was once again living out this promise. Would it happen? Would she really bear a child? Did God really promise? And then one cool morning, she woke achy. Not the usual stiffness of old age, rather a different ache. And she knew that God had indeed kept that long-awaited promise. She welcomed these new feelings, the aches and the pains of pregnancy. She smiled more, and as her body grew heavy with child, joy had lightened her step. When the blessed day came, it was all such a whirl. Then the demanding cry. So soft, yet so strong in such a small child. When she saw him in that great moment, she cried tears of joy. And she laughed. Not the bitter laugh of days past. This was a new laugh. Joyous, strong, contagious. Isaac had to be the child's name, for with his name is the reminder of laughter, both bitter and joy-filled. God's promise delayed, God's promise made true, because nothing is too hard for God. Our New Testament reading comes from Mark 10, verse 27, as we reflect on all of God's word this morning. Jesus looked at them and said, "With humans this is impossible, but not with God. All things are possible with God." God's holy word for us this day. Our story this morning about the family of God is a story that begins with Abraham but ends with Sarah, the father and mother of all nations. This part of their story reminds us of other baby announcements in the Bible, where a divine being promises a child to a barren woman. Here, Sarah is not only able to have children, she is well past the childbearing age, and the fact of the couple's advanced age underscores the miraculous nature of this particular birth. It looks different from the other baby announcements, however. For one thing, the announcement comes as the climax to the story of Abraham's offer of hospitality to three strangers who turn out to be divine visitors. The story is wrapped up in the value of maintaining a trusting and generous openness to strangers, about whom nothing is known. If Abraham had not invited the three strangers to stay, he never would have discovered that they were two angels along with the Lord in human form, nor received the message of the blessing to come. Here, the blessing came to those who entertain angels unaware, while those who ignore the needs of strangers or turn away from them are judged. Abraham's hospitality to the strangers stands out to us, particularly in this day and age of tightened borders and heightened restrictions on foreigners seeking asylum in other countries, or simply applying for travel visas and being refused. Abraham is learning a lot about God's plans for his life, but it is not clear how much Sarah knew. However, she's part of the big picture for sure. You might remember that Abraham had already been promised by God that he would be the father of many nations. Genesis 12 says, "I, the Lord, will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." Kind of hard to be the father of all nations when you have no offspring. At first, Abraham thought that his servant would be his heir, since he remained childless, but he was put straight as God told him specifically that his heir would be a natural son. "This servant will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." God took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be." So Abraham had a son, Ishmael, by his wife's servant Hagar, but was then told that he would have a natural son by his own wife. Abraham might have believed that, but it seemed as if it was way past time as he turned 100 for God's promise of a natural-born son to be fulfilled for obvious reasons. That is where the problem lies when Abraham receives some very special visitors out in the middle of the desert. Not like there was anyone else to host them out there in the desert, nor were he and Sarah probably expecting guests. We are told that they are camped out under the trees of Mamre, the Tinebith trees or oaks, maybe the only shade in the desert region near Canaan, about 2 miles north of Hebron, which was 19 miles southwest of Jerusalem. While Hebron lies in a kind of valley, the city is just over 3,000 feet above sea level, which makes it the highest town in Palestine. Abraham and Sarah spent much of their time here. It was also where the Lord gave them their new names. Abram, meaning exalted father, became Abraham, father of a multitude. It is here, probably from a distance, that Abraham sees these strangers approach. He then goes out of his way to show hospitality to these three strangers that show up midday at the tent under the shade of the tree. Abraham provided traditional hospitality, yes, but he also went beyond that, maybe even a little overboard. Remember, this is out in the desert, a distance from the town of Hebron, with any supplies. Yet Abraham treats these three like royalty. He gave them prompt attention, meeting their every need. He bowed low to the ground in welcoming them. He politely addressed one of his guests as "my Lord" and called himself "your servant," a common way of speaking when addressing a superior. He acted as if he would be a favor to him if they allowed him to serve them. He asked that water be brought to wash their feet, an act of courtesy to refresh a traveler in a hot, dusty climate. He had a lavish meal with fresh bread and a young calf prepared for them. And he stood nearby, assuming the posture of a servant to meet their every need. We are not told at what stage of the visit Abraham realized that he was entertaining the Lord, accompanied by two angels, all in human form. If he recognized the identity of his visitors early in the encounter, then his bowing down, his over-the-top hospitality, and his very warm welcome were most appropriate. On the other hand, if he acted so courteously and generously to total strangers, he not only unknowingly entertained angels, but he also discovered firsthand the truth that what is done generously to one of the Lord's people is done to the Lord himself. Matthew 25, verse 40. Hospitality to strangers or foreigners. Xenia is used here in the Greek for hospitality, derived from xenos, meaning foreigner, or when used as an adjective, strange, unusual, or foreign. The Greek word for hospitality comes from the root word meaning foreigner or stranger. In the Near East, hospitality was the process of receiving outsiders and changing them from strangers to guests. Hospitality, you might recall, is different from entertaining family and friends. Strangers were treated with great care and provided for so that the stranger would not remain a stranger for long, with the hope that they would soon become a guest, and then move from guest to transformed stranger, or even friend. We know from our lessons from coming to the table during Lent that we are not to forget to extend hospitality to the stranger or the foreigner. Jesus sat at the table time and time again with people considered foreigners and strangers. Paul's letter to the Hebrews in 13:2 reminds us, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for some who have done this have entertained angels without realizing it. The verb here translated forget comes from a root word that means to escape notice, to be hidden or forgotten. It is so easy for us to fail to extend hospitality to someone who doesn't look like us or act like us, a stranger. We are embarrassed when we confront a strange culture, unsure of ourselves in the presence of unfamiliar behavior, turned away by an unfamiliar race, confused when we don't understand another language. It takes a little something extra to engage in the hospitality of the foreigner or stranger. That something extra is the love of Christ that reaches out to the outsider and includes him or her. It draws that person into the inner circle where, to our amazement, we discover an absolutely delightful and lovable individual who brings a unique blessing into our lives. Actually, the stranger could be an angel, a messenger of God, sharing the Lord's specifically designed blessing, which we would never have known if we had not received the foreigner or stranger in the first place. Abraham's hospitality included a fine meal, which he hastily requests his wife and servant to prepare. While everything appears rushed in the telling, this was an extended visit, with enough time to prepare this lavish meal and properly welcome the strangers. Behind the tent flap, Sarah listens in on the conversation she is not allowed as a woman to be a part of. She hears something she is not expecting to hear. She was so surprised at this hard-to-believe, actually impossible news that she laughed within herself. Evidently, her laughter was not as discreet as her eavesdropping, however, because the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything impossible for the Lord?" The Lord asked this question as a challenge to Sarah and Abraham's faith. Do they not remember the promise made? Do they remember God's promise of a natural-born son? The Lord made a promise, a covenant, and now the Lord your God is fulfilling that promise. Even with their approaching years, they haven't forgotten God's promise of a family, an heir. They just figured their time had passed. They are challenged with the acknowledgement of God's ability to honor the promise, even in their old age. And a question we all are faced with sometime or another. Can God really do this? Make this happen in my life? We, like Abraham and Sarah, need to remember under all circumstances that God can certainly do what seems impossible. This story usually has a focus on the laughter, particularly Sarah's laugh at the unbelievable impossibility of what the guests say. But Abraham laughs too. He actually laughs first. Earlier in Genesis chapter 17, God also said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her." Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, "Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? The promise is clear. I will bless her and also give you a son by her. And then I will bless her, and she shall be the mother of nations. Kings of people shall be from her." Abram's response was as understandable as it was inappropriate. He fell on his face and laughed. God was solidifying the Lord's plan for Abraham, his heir. The child to be conceived through Sarah would be called Isaac. Abraham and Sarah have waited for decades for the promise of a son to be fulfilled. How long will it take for God's promise to come about? They had about given up in their old age. Laughter is a way to accept the absurd, the impossible. As Sarah tries to deny her laughter from the tent, God affirms it once again. Yes, you did laugh. And again, God acknowledges Sarah's reality. It will take time, and when Isaac is born, Sarah will laugh again, this time with genuine joy. After many dramatic events, delays, and roller coaster experiences, the second part of this story unfolds. God does just what God said would be done. What was thought to be impossible becomes possible. Sarah, in her 90s, conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age of 100 years. And Abraham called his son Isaac. Isaac means he laughs or laughter. And once again, God had proved faithful to the promises made, carrying out the purposes and will of God, even under what seemed to be impossible circumstances. The promised son through whom God will continue the covenant line is born at last. Abraham miraculously becomes a father to the seed of God's nation, God's people, with the mother of all nations, Sarah. God's family has its beginning under the covenant promise. The covenant promise made with Abraham and his descendants would then become the covenant promise passed down to Isaac and his descendants. 3 strangers show up, appearing in the desert wilderness. The Lord and 2 angels are received with gracious hospitality. They are fully dependent on the mercy of the strangers that extend hospitality to them, Abraham and Sarah. The finest flour, not barley, is made into bread. Not a little bit of bread, but a lot of fresh baked bread. The young calf is prepared. The veal is served. Abraham rushes around to make his guests happy. The future blessing God has for the world is announced right here. And all we can do is laugh. It is all we can do in that moment of surprise. The unexpected gift of life is what is celebrated here with the laughter of joy. It is the power of promise. God's future can be different than what one expects, but by the power of God, the challenge can be overcome. I think this story of Abraham and Sarah and their hospitality helps guide us as we begin our venture as a Matthew 25 church. Working together on the 3 priorities of the Matthew 25 Church Initiative means this: that we will become known as people and churches who keep an open house and are generous with our hospitality. If we keep open house and are generous with our hospitality as individuals, as churches, and even as a community, people will open up with God. And together we will experience renewed energy of our generous God together. That is being a Matthew 25 church. Abraham and Sarah modeled that open house of hospitality for us. Welcoming strangers, offering true hospitality is like having an open house. When we offer an open house, we are opening the doors wide. We are putting out our best, showing our best hospitality. We are putting on a spread and inviting folks to come as they are. Come as they will. Come as they are comfortable. An open house may have a formal invitation, but it rarely has a prescribed list of who is invited. It is an open invitation to come. An open house is a chance to show off our hospitality, for us to welcome everyone, including the stranger. We must also remember, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. May it always be so.